Happy Friday, January 20th, 2023. I'm Josh Askvig. With me, as always, is our Associate State Director for Advocacy, Janelle Mose. We're live from the Janice Chaney Conference Room here in Bismarck for all things advocacy with AARP North Dakota. Excited to be here today. We have a ton to talk about. Janelle, happy Friday.
Yes, I'm glad it's Friday. It was a busy week.
That's good. That's a good way to say it. So Janelle has had a very busy week, and we've got plenty to dive into. And so I think rather than banter back and forth, let's just dive straight into it. This week was huge. If you remember last Friday, we talked about it. Monday, the fight that we've been picking for or edging for or working on to try and lower prescription drugs. The first kind of like major step of the legislative session happened on Monday. So why don't you just kind of walk through what happened on Monday? What did we talk about on Monday, and go from there?
Yeah, you're right. So our Senate Bill 2031, which was heard in the Senate Human Services Committee on Monday morning, we had great representation from our volunteers. We filled the room with those red AARP shirts. Kathy Schwan, our volunteer state president, was there really to introduce the bill and talk about why it's so important to North Dakotans to have lower cost of prescription drugs. And we really, brought in some folks from across the country. Drew Gattin was here from Nashville, and he was the author of that model bill. And he really walked the committee through, the tenets of the bill and how other states have considered it, and really helped them understand why this is an important step to lowering the cost of medicine here.
Yeah, I think the two high level takeaways for me for that were I think it was great that we were there talking about the real impacts that high prescription drug prices have on North Dakotans. Mm-hmm. So this isn't, and again, I agree with you, and thank you to our volunteers. And we're looking forward to seeing a bunch of you next week, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as part of it. But really putting that face behind, we can throw all the statistics, we can tell all the stories we want, but actually having Kathy and Bob testify and tell their personal stories and share other stories. Also having, Susan, Ellen, George, who am I missing? I'm going to miss somebody in the room with us, wearing their AARP gear. It was noticed by the committee, certainly. So I think that was important. And then secondly, it was very clear the opposition's lined up. They're nervous, and that it's really important that we keep the pressure on not only the committee, but the legislature as a whole, that we're expecting them to act on something to lower prescription drug costs this session.
Yeah, you're right. The thing that I always remember, one of the three things, that we're a fierce defender, right? And we showed up and we were pretty fierce on Monday. I even got comments later in the week saying, wow, you had a lot of people in that room. So I think people know that we're there. They know that we're standing up for North Dakotans. And I think the other thing that was really great was Kathy. You always wonder what happens to the information we gather from you, right? Either the petitions or the emails. Kathy Schwan, our volunteer state president, actually held up those 324 petitions and showed the committee, demonstrated this isn't just me, it's not just Bob, it's not just the two of us, but it's 324 people that signed these petitions, are sending emails, sending in postcards. Even if you're not at the Capitol with us every day, legislators know who you are, they know who AARP is, and they're ready to have that conversation with us.
Yeah, there's a great shot that was in the Bismarck Tribune. I think Marnie had it up on the screen, or maybe still does, as part of it, that shows Kathy. I think it was just a great photo, and helps highlight the reason why. And so if you ever, as Janelle mentioned, if you ever wondered, when we tell you we'll deliver those petitions, we did. They are in the official record for the 68th Legislative Assembly that we delivered to the Senate Human Services Committee as part of it. So before we leave this topic, did they do anything on it this week? The committee heard the bill. What happened? What's happened since then on that topic?
Yeah, so the committee hasn't taken action, and that's not rare. Committees don't usually take action immediately on bills, especially bills that are important like this, that they really want to think about and have a discussion. What's happening right now, there are some amendments being considered and being drafted right now, and we anticipate that those will show up in committee next week. And again, that's the time that the committee, schedules time where they have a really spirited discussion and a debate about what's in the bill. Should everything remain in the bill? Should they, vote to move it forward and have what's called a do pass recommendation, or do they want to amend it further, or do they say they're not going to recommend it moving forward? So next week's really a little time while they'll start to dig into the meat of that bill and decide what to do as a committee.
Totally agree, and we'll walk you through all of the mechanics of what's next. But right now, just know, continue to reach out to your senators specifically. And if you live in one of the districts for where the senator sits on the Senate Human Services Committee. That's critically important right now to try and keep the pressure on and let legislators know this is still on your mind. This is still something you care about, and we want you to do this legislative session. And in the term of this, we expect you not to leave without doing something about prescription drug costs. I think that should be clearly the message as part of it. So prescription drugs, that would have been enough for 1 week as part of it, but that was not the only thing that we talked about this week, and that primarily, and I want to give kudos to Janelle. This was kind of, I was up there Monday and Tuesday, and then Janelle was kind of flying solo for a lot of the week, doing a lot of legwork as part of it. And so, no, you're well represented as part of it, and that's because we trust her to do it. But talk a little bit about it. We had some more discussion around property taxes and homestead property tax credit. Again, you want to just maybe touch on that a little bit from this week?
Yeah, I think it's just going to be an ongoing discussion between the House and the Senate about how do we make sure that people stay in their homes and in their communities longer, and their property taxes always come up. And so what's the best way to help residents stay if they paid their home, paid for their home, but the home value keeps increasing, so the property value goes up. And the thing that we keep saying is the best solution for that is really that homestead tax credit, which really, there's a bill in the Senate as well in the House that will expand eligibility for that. So it really targets people that need the most help to stay in their communities longer. And so we're going to continue to have that conversation and make sure that homestead tax credit stays also intact, but hopefully expands the eligibility there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last one that I know you spent some time on this week, and it's not an issue we're wading too far in, but we do a ton of voter education work. Many of you probably remember last year all the work we did to help you understand what was on the ballot, who was on the ballot, and how you vote. And so we do pay attention to voting bills and issues related to voting. I don't think we've had anything, and you're going to correct me now that I've said this, I don't think we've had anything that we've weighed in on yet, but we've been keeping close track on issues that might impact voting and your ability to cast your ballot. So,
and the bills up this week, we were just watching, we didn't weigh in on, and it's mainly making small tweaks to, ballot access. So looking at if you need, a different way to read the ballot, creating more accessibility. And again, like Josh said, our hope is just to make sure that you have the ability and the resources you need to vote. So they're just making little tweaks to some of the language and statute that really promotes access and encourages other folks to vote, but we haven't weighed in on those bills yet.
Yeah, and I might just spend just a second touching on that, because we get asked all the time, and Janelle can highlight this, we get asked to weigh in on literally hundreds of different topics in the legislature at times. And I just want to remind our viewers, there are a lot of times we'll monitor things to just make sure that they're not going to have some sort of significant impact on older adults. And if they do, we're ready to jump in based on what ARP policy is and what we've heard from you all to make sure that we're that fierce defender and that we're not seeing something change that will be detrimental to you or other older adults, or if it's something that's going to significantly impact you in a positive way, jump in and help press that. But we also understand that we could spend a lot of time on 100 different things. And just to remind you, we're really focused this session on lowering prescription drug prices, helping to combat fraud and elder financial exploitation, pushing additional resources and supports for home and community-based services, or the ability for you to stay in your community longer and safer as you are. And then last but not least, really continuing to fight for retirement security and whatnot. And so if you hear us sometimes talk about these issues and you're like, well, why aren't they weighing in on it? We've made a judgment based on our policy and our expertise and what's happening that, it's not going to have a significant impact as part of it. And sometimes, just to be blunt, there are times we'll read a bill and we're not quite sure what it does. And so we'll go listen to the hearing and make sure we understand what it does, and then make a decision on where we can weigh in, because those public hearings aren't the only opportunity to weigh in. You can send notes to legislators, you can talk to them in the hallway, spend time on that. So a little behind the curtain stuff too, as part of it. And if you're ever interested in helping us out on some of those things or monitoring things, you can join Janelle's advocacy team. She'd love to have more folks help her keep track of that stuff as well. So the only other thing, it's not on our list, so I'm going to go off script for just a second, but I know based on what I was tracking, mostly from afar, a lot of the agency budget stuff has really kind of started to pick up some steam. The legislature, I believe, adopted its first formal financial forecast that kind of helps it understand how much money they're going to have to to spend or provide tax relief, or what they're going to do, or put in savings accounts for that nature. So anything you want to comment on that from what you saw so far this week regarding agency budgets?
They're just wading cautiously into the budgets. They're asking for more detail. I think there's a lot of decisions that still have to be made between the House and the Senate, but also within those committees. So say, for example, looking at employee compensation for state employees, what package are they going to agree to? And so that really impacts not just one budget, but every state budget. So they're cautiously wading into the details, and I think they'll start to really make some of those critical decisions next week.
Yeah, I think what's fascinating, again, having only been up there Monday and Tuesday this week, but what's fascinating to watch and keep track of, because the nice thing is almost everything is online now, and kudos to the North Dakota Legislature. They did that during COVID, but they've kept it up that you can keep track of some of this stuff, whether you're in Bismarck at the Capitol or whether you're from afar. But there's two new appropriations chairs, one in the House and one in the Senate, and so the process is just a little bit different. And that's, I'm not making a judgment whether it's good or bad. It's been fascinating to watch the little bit different approach and how much that actually is going to impact what the overall end of it is as part of it. So, all right, enough about this week. I'm super excited because next week's a big week for us again. First and foremost, next week is our AARP Advocacy Day. I was reminded last week, remind viewers this week, we haven't done this since 2019. So the fact that we're going to have people back helping us in the Capitol and a group of folks, super excited about it. And in addition to having you all back, and we're going to talk more about that in a second here as part of it, there's some big issues again on the agenda, and we start right out of the gun on Monday again. So you want to talk about what's coming up on Monday first?
Yep. As you mentioned, we're covering 4 really important core areas this legislative session, and one of our priorities is fraud. And so a bill that we're going to be testifying in support of on Monday is a financial fraud victim restitution bill. So it's very limited in scope, but it's really a significant step forward in addressing, financial fraud victims, and how can we create a restitution fund that could provide, some relief if you are a victim of crime related to financials. So we'll make sure that you have more details on what that bill. It's Senate Bill 2325. You can go on the legislative website and read it a little bit, but make sure that you tune in and you can watch the hearing live if you're, in Bismarck or across the state. We'll make sure you have access to those links, but it's really a significant step forward for fraud victims.
Totally agree. Looking forward to being there to stand up and support it and be a part of it. We know that that's been on your mind. We've heard from you in the various surveys and places we've asked, between surveys, questionnaires, polling, et cetera, that fraud and scams are on your mind. And so I agree with Janelle. Well, it's going to be pretty narrow in scope. We think it's a very important and significant step forward. So it also looks like next week we're going to have more voting stuff that we're going to be keeping track of.
Yeah, I think at last count this morning, there's at least a half a dozen
wow.
Bills related to either polling places or ballots or campaign. There's a lot of things, a lot of conversations happening both in the House and the Senate. And again, some of them are just minor tweaks, maybe a word or two change in the statute, but some of them make some pretty significant changes to ballot locations and, really, again, our focus is really making sure that you have the ability to vote, and the accessibility issues, there aren't any problems with access to the ballots or the, locations for you to vote. So we'll keep you up to date on that, but it's really a voting week next week.
Awesome. Also on the agenda, it looks like next week, 2 budgets that we're following pretty closely this session, the Attorney General's budget and the DHS. So first of all, let's explain what DHS is, because I know we know what that is, but for our viewers who might not know what that is.
So the Attorney General budget first. So the piece that we look for the Attorney General's budget is really that Consumer Fraud Protection Division, making sure that the funding stays in place. So again, if you're a victim of consumer fraud, we've got the resources available so you can report those crimes, that they can look into them. But there's also a Medicaid fraud unit, and they're looking for additional resources, including staff and other things that can really bolster their ability to look at Medicaid fraud. We were the last state in the nation to have that Medicaid fraud unit, so we're happy to go and support and say these are 2 really important pieces of the Attorney General's budget that really help a lot of North Dakotans related to fraud and scams. And then DHS is the Department of Human Services, but last legislative session, the Department of Human Services and the Department of Health merged as one agency. So they're now referred to as the Department of Health and Human Services, but they ran into a little snag in terms of their budgets this legislative session. So their budgets are still being considered separately, although they're one agency. So next week, the Department of Human Services budget is being heard. And if you're interested in economic assistance or aging services, they'll start to really go line item by line item, look at services that are there to support folks in their homes, in their communities, making sure that they can stay there. It gets a little weedy in terms of numbers, but you really hear what happens behind those numbers. So if they say they want $1 million, what does that do to support you staying in your house, or having energy assistance or food assistance? Those are the really details they'll start to dig into next week.
Yeah, and I know we'll be there on that one too, specifically around our efforts to push for your ability and want to stay safe and independent in your homes and communities for a longer period of time. Last but not least, Senate Bill 2239. So we're hitting all three of our four big issues next week between fraud, home and community-based services, and now pushing for retirement security as part of it. So talk a little bit about 2239 in a nutshell.
So if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, we talked about pensions, the employee benefit plan for state employees and public employees. So Senate Bill 2239 is a bill that was introduced by Senator Cleary and Senator Dever from the Bismarck area. And it's really the Senate side of having a conversation about what does the long-term health of the PERS, or the public employees retirement system, look like. So what 2239 does, it actually retains that defined benefit package, which we at AARP have really been posting our flag saying this is important. We want to make sure that folks that have earned their retirement, that they can retain that, or folks that are nearing retirement. So this is a bill that we'll be supporting, because on the other side is House Bill 1040, and again that moves from a defined benefit to a defined contribution plan. So this is a huge conversation up at the state legislature. We're not the only ones weighing in on this. I think folks are really concerned about public employees, state employees, making sure that they have long-term retirement security. So this bill will be up next week. And so it's starting a separate but similar conversation in the Senate that will have to, at some point in time, merge with that House conversation.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on, while we're fighting for pension security for state employees and quite frankly, political subdivision employees, there are a number of cities and counties that are also accessed into that system. It all is also about the bigger picture, and it is about making sure that we provide retirement security for as many people as we can. And one of the worries is we know, at least based on analysis from other states that have made the switch from a defined benefit to a defined contribution, the state ends up paying about twice the cost for about a third of the benefit. In other words, you as a taxpayer end up spending more money to provide a lesser benefit. And that just doesn't seem to make sense to us in terms of long-term fiscal impacts to the state that help support programs and funding and needs for older adults. But it also, we're concerned about those employees then needing to rely on other economic assistance programs and seeing those budgets have to increase because we didn't spend money on the front end to take care of those folks. And there are other ways that we'll continue to look at how we can increase retirement security across the spectrum as part of it. So next week's a big week, going to be a busy week. The most exciting thing about next week before we get into taking action, though, is next Tuesday, January 24th, is AARP North Dakota Advocacy Day at the Capitol. We're going to touch on that afterwards, but if you haven't registered, I'm going to encourage you to go do that. Come join us. We'd love to see you. But before we get to that, we want folks to take some action next week. Kind of what do we want them to zero in and focus on before next week?
You still have time to email your senator. Our number one priority is lowering the cost of medicine. So make sure you email your senator to support Senate Bill 2031. They still need to hear from you. We know we still have kind of a steep hill that we're climbing, but we want the legislature to know that something needs to be done this legislative session to really move that needle, move beyond just saying, yes, we understand medicine's expensive, but we're not sure what to do about it. But we've given them a piece of legislation to consider, and 2031 is really a vehicle, a way to start moving that forward and lowering the cost of medicine.
So if you haven't, you can send a note. I know Janelle will send it to our advocacy list in our advocacy database later today to encourage you to do it, or you can go directly to the North Dakota Legislative website and send an email directly to your senator there, or better yet, come join us next Tuesday at the Capitol. We're going to get started around 8 a.m. on Tuesday, January 24th, run till the middle of the afternoon, around 2:30, 2:45, somewhere in there. Help you meet your legislators if you don't know who they are. If you do know who they are, just help you connect with them and encourage you to talk to your legislators about the issues that are important to you and that we've talked about. Again, it's hard to believe it's been over 4 years since we've done this, but I'm excited about it. And I can just tell you the energy you all bring to the Capitol. Legislators know it's coming up, or they will at least on Monday know it's coming up on Tuesday, and they actually enjoy it too. They really thrive and really appreciate seeing you all, hearing from you all, and doing it. So if you haven't already registered, please go register. I'm going to encourage you to register so that we can make sure we have lunch for you, we have a shirt for you, we have the stuff you need to be able to connect with your legislators. Come join, 80 of your colleagues from across the state, 80 or more colleagues of yours from across the state for Advocacy Day at the Capitol. So we've talked for a while. I think this has been one of our longer ones, but really good information as part of it. Anything else you want to add for this week, Janelle?
No, just we can't wait to see you next week. I think it'll be exciting. Legislators are really, this is the best time to come. We couldn't have timed this any more perfectly. I scheduled this probably about 18 months ago, and who knew that it would fall on a week that is, right in the middle of things that we just talked about and things that are, going to be hot on the agenda for next week. So we can't wait to see you.
Yeah. Excited to see you next week, Tuesday, January 24th. Don't forget to email your senator on Senate Bill 2031. And with that, this has been another All Things Advocacy.